The morning mist hung heavy over Windsor Castle as Prince William adjusted his tie for the third time. His hands trembled slightly, not from the cold October air, but from the weight of what lay ahead. In less than an hour, he would face his father, King Charles III, in what palace insiders were calling the most important private audience in recent royal history. William had requested this meeting 3 weeks ago, after discovering documents that would change everything the British public knew about the monarchy's financial dealings. The papers, hidden away in his late grandmother Queen Elizabeth's private study, revealed a complex web of offshore accounts and questionable investments that had been carefully concealed from Parliament and the public for decades. As he walked through the castle's ancient corridors, William's mind raced with the implications of what he had uncovered. The documents showed that the royal family had been involved in controversial arms deals, had invested heavily in companies with poor environmental records, and had received substantial payments from foreign governments in exchange for political influence. The revelation that his own family had been complicit in activities that went against everything they publicly stood for made his stomach churn. The weight of the flash drive in his jacket pocket felt heavier with each step. He had spent weeks copying the most damaging documents, knowing that once he presented them to his father, there would be no turning back. The evidence was too compelling, too detailed to ignore. Bank statements, signed agreements, encrypted communications between palace officials and foreign representatives, it was all there, meticulously documented and impossible to deny. William had always prided himself on being different from previous generations of royals. He had married for love, not political alliance. He had been open about his struggles with mental health, breaking centuries of royal tradition. He had championed environmental causes and spoken out against corruption wherever he found it. But now he found himself at the center of the biggest corruption scandal in royal history, and the weight of family loyalty was crushing him. The security briefing that morning had been unusually thorough. Chief of Palace Security, Commander Thompson, had personally overseen the arrangements for the meeting. "This conversation is of the utmost sensitivity," he had told his team. "No recording devices, no unauthorized personnel, and absolutely no leaks to the press." What Thompson didn't know was that William had already made copies of everything and had been in secret communication with investigative journalists for weeks. As William approached the king's private study, he could see the increased security presence. Royal protection officers stood at every corner, their eyes scanning constantly for threats. But the real threat, William knew, was not from outside the castle walls. It was the information he carried, information that could bring down the monarchy as they knew it. The study door loomed ahead, its heavy oak panels carved with the royal coat of arms. William had played in this room as a child, had done his homework at the massive mahogany desk while his grandmother worked on state papers. Now, those same walls would witness what might be the most difficult conversation of his life. He thought about his children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, and what kind of legacy he would leave them. Would they thank him for his honesty, or would they hate him for destroying the institution they were born to inherit? The burden of the crown had always been heavy, but William had never imagined it would require him to choose between his family and his conscience. The documents he had discovered painted a picture of systematic deception that went back decades. His grandmother, the woman he had revered as the embodiment of duty and honor, had apparently been aware of and complicit in financial arrangements that would have scandalized the nation. His father, who had spent years building a reputation as an advocate for environmental and social causes, had personally approved investments in companies that violated everything he claimed to stand for. William stopped walking and leaned against the stone wall, trying to calm his racing heart. He closed his eyes and tried to find the strength his mother, Princess Diana, had shown when she faced difficult truths about the royal family. Diana had paid the ultimate price for her honesty, but she had never wavered in her commitment to doing what she believed was right, even when it meant standing alone against the most powerful institution in Britain. The conversation with his father would determine not just the future of their relationship, but the future of the monarchy itself. William knew that once he shared what he had discovered, the king would have to choose between covering up the scandal to protect the family's reputation or taking responsibility and facing the consequences. Either choice would be devastating. As he resumed walking toward the study, William's phone buzzed with a text message from Catherine. "Thinking of you today. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. The children send their love." The message gave him strength, reminding him that he wasn't alone in this fight. His wife had been his rock throughout the investigation, helping him understand the implications of what he had found and supporting his decision to confront his father. The palace around him seemed to whisper with the secrets of centuries past. Every portrait on the walls, every piece of furniture, every carefully preserved artifact represented a legacy that he was about to threaten. But William had learned that sometimes the greatest act of love for an institution is to force it to confront its failures and change. He had spent sleepless nights researching the legal implications of what he had discovered. The royal family's involvement in questionable financial dealings could result in criminal charges, parliamentary inquiries, and calls for the abolition of the monarchy. But staying silent would make him complicit in the deception, and William refused to become another generation of royals who put institutional preservation above moral responsibility. The security checkpoint ahead marked the final barrier before his meeting with the king. William straightened his shoulders and prepared to submit to the routine security procedures, unaware that his carefully planned revelation was about to face an unexpected challenge. In his jacket pocket, the flash drive containing copies of the damaging documents seemed to burn against his chest, a physical reminder of the explosive truth he was about to unleash. The next hour would determine whether Prince William would be remembered as the royal who saved the monarchy through transparency and reform, or as the prince who brought down a 1,000-year-old institution in pursuit of the truth. Either way, there would be no going back from what was about to unfold in the king's private study. Sergeant James Mitchell had been a royal protection officer for 15 years, but he had never been assigned to search a member of the royal family before. As Prince William approached the final security checkpoint before the king's study, Mitchell felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on his shoulders. Commander Thompson's orders had been clear and unprecedented: search everyone, including the prince. No exceptions. Mitchell's hands were steady as he activated the handheld metal detector, but his mind was racing. In all his years of service, the palace's security protocols had never required such extreme measures for a family meeting. The fact that Prince William, second in line to the throne, was being subjected to the same security screening as any foreign dignitary suggested that something extraordinary was happening behind the castle's ancient walls. "Your Royal Highness," Mitchell said, his voice professional but apologetic, "I'm afraid I need to conduct a routine security check before your meeting with His Majesty." William nodded, his face pale but determined. As Mitchell began the screening process, he noticed the prince's unusual nervousness, the slight tremor in his hands, the way his eyes kept darting toward the study door, the thin layer of perspiration on his forehead despite the cool morning air. The metal detector beeped softly as it passed over William's jacket pocket. Mitchell's training kicked in immediately. "I'm going to need you to empty your pockets, sir," he said, maintaining the respectful tone required when addressing royalty while following the security protocols that could not be compromised. William hesitated for just a moment, a hesitation that Mitchell's experienced eye immediately noticed. From his jacket, William produced his phone, a pen, his wallet, and what appeared to be a small electronic device that Mitchell didn't immediately recognize. "What is this, Your Royal Highness?" Mitchell asked, holding up the small black object that was about the size of a USB drive but with additional components that suggested more sophisticated technology. William's face flushed slightly. "It's a flash drive," he said, but Mitchell's years of experience with surveillance equipment told him there was more to the device than the prince was admitting. The object had the telltale signs of recording equipment, a small microphone port, an LED indicator light, and what appeared to be wireless transmission capabilities. Mitchell activated his radio with practiced discretion. "Control, this is Mitchell at Checkpoint 7. I need immediate technical analysis on a suspicious electronic device." Within minutes, the palace's chief technology security officer, Sarah Chen, arrived with her equipment kit. Chen was one of the few people in the castle who had clearance to examine any device that might pose a security threat, regardless of who possessed it. "May I?" Chen asked William, gesturing toward the device. The prince nodded reluctantly, and Chen connected it to her analysis equipment. The screen immediately lit up with data that made her eyebrows rise in surprise. "Your Royal Highness," she said carefully, "this device has recording capabilities, wireless transmission functions, and encrypted storage. It's essentially a sophisticated surveillance tool." The revelation sent a shockwave through the small group gathered at the security checkpoint. Mitchell had found recording equipment on Prince William, equipment that could have been used to secretly document his conversation with the king. The implications were staggering. Was the prince planning to record his father without consent? Was he working with journalists or foreign agents? The questions multiplied with each passing second. Commander Thompson arrived within minutes of Chen's discovery, his face grave with concern. As head of palace security, he had seen many threats to the royal family, but never from within. "Your Royal Highness," he said, his voice carefully controlled, "I need to understand what you intended to do with this device." William looked around at the security team surrounding him, knowing that his carefully planned confrontation with his father was taking an unexpected turn. "I need to speak with the king," he said firmly. "What I have to discuss with him is of national importance." But Thompson was not satisfied with such a vague explanation, especially given the sophisticated nature of the recording equipment. The security chief made a decision that would have been unthinkable under normal circumstances. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to submit to a full security search," Thompson said. "Given the nature of the device you were carrying, we need to ensure there are no other surveillance tools." The request was unprecedented. No member of the royal family had ever been subjected to such treatment within their own palace. Mitchell conducted the search with professional thoroughness but obvious discomfort. As he checked William's clothing, shoes, and personal items, he discovered additional equipment that confirmed his worst fears. Hidden in the lining of William's jacket was a miniature recording device, and in his shoe was a backup memory card. The prince had come prepared to document his conversation with the king through multiple means. "Your Royal Highness," Thompson said, his voice now carrying the authority of someone who had discovered a serious security breach, "you are carrying sophisticated surveillance equipment into a private meeting with the sovereign. I need to know who you're working with and what you plan to do with any recordings you might make." William's composure finally cracked. The stress of the past weeks, combined with the unexpected discovery of his recording equipment, overwhelmed his carefully maintained royal demeanor. "You don't understand," he said, his voice rising slightly. "The king needs to know what I've discovered. The royal family has been involved in activities that could destroy the monarchy if they become public. I need proof of his reaction, proof of what he knows." The security team exchanged concerned glances. Prince William was suggesting that the royal family was involved in activities serious enough to threaten the institution itself. But his methods, secretly recording the king, suggested a level of distrust and desperation that was deeply troubling. Chen examined the devices more thoroughly and made another disturbing discovery. "Commander," she said quietly, "these devices have been transmitting data for the past several weeks. Someone has been remotely monitoring the prince's activities." The revelation that William might be under surveillance by unknown parties added another layer of complexity to an already unprecedented situation. Thompson realized that he was facing a crisis that went far beyond normal security protocols. If Prince William was telling the truth about discovering damaging information about the royal family, and if he was being monitored by outside parties, the implications for national security were enormous. But if the prince was acting on his own to secretly record the king, he was committing an act that bordered on treason. The security chief made a decision that would change the course of royal history. Instead of allowing William to proceed to his meeting with the king, Thompson decided to detain the prince until he could fully understand the scope of the threat. "Your Royal Highness," he said, "I'm afraid I cannot allow you to meet with His Majesty until we've conducted a full investigation of these devices and determined who else might be involved." William's face went white with shock and anger. "You're detaining me?" he asked incredulously. "I'm the heir to the throne, and you're treating me like a common criminal?" But Thompson stood firm, knowing that his duty to protect the monarchy superseded even his respect for its members. The standoff at the security checkpoint had lasted nearly an hour, and word was beginning to spread through the palace that something unusual was happening. Staff members whispered in corners, and other security personnel gathered nearby, sensing the tension but not understanding its source. As William stood surrounded by security officers who were treating him as a potential threat rather than the future king, he realized that his carefully planned confrontation with his father had become something far more complicated and dangerous. The truth he had hoped to reveal was still locked away on the confiscated devices, but now he faced the possibility that he might never get the chance to present it to the king. The next few hours would determine whether Prince William's attempt to force transparency on the royal family would succeed, or whether his methods would be seen as such a betrayal that he might lose his place in the line of succession forever. The secure conference room in the palace basement had never hosted a member of the royal family as a subject of investigation. William sat across from Commander Thompson, technology expert Sarah Chen, and Deputy Chief of Staff Margaret Thornberry, who had been hastily summoned when the situation escalated beyond a simple security matter. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows on everyone's faces, and the sterile environment felt like an interrogation room rather than a place for royal business. "Let me be absolutely clear about what we've discovered," Chen said, spreading printouts of her technical analysis across the table. "These devices represent military-grade surveillance equipment. The recording capabilities include audio, wireless transmission, and encrypted storage with remote access. Someone invested considerable resources in providing you with this technology, Your Royal Highness." William leaned forward, his initial shock giving way to a growing sense of urgency. "You're missing the point entirely," he said, his voice strained with frustration. "The equipment isn't the issue, it's what I need to show my father. Every day we delay, more damage is being done to the monarchy's credibility." Margaret Thornberry, who had served the royal household for 23 years, had never seen a crisis quite like this one. As Deputy Chief of Staff, she was responsible for managing the delicate balance between the family's private affairs and their public duties. Now she found herself trying to understand how the heir to the throne had come to possess sophisticated surveillance equipment and why he felt compelled to secretly record his own father. "Your Royal Highness," Thornberry said carefully, "perhaps you could help us understand what information you believe is so important that it justifies these extraordinary measures. We're all here to serve the crown, and if there's a genuine threat to the institution, we need to address it properly." William looked around the table at the three people who held his immediate future in their hands. He had spent weeks preparing for his confrontation with the king, but he had never anticipated having to justify his actions to the palace security apparatus. The irony wasn't lost on him. The very people whose job it was to protect the monarchy were now the ones preventing him from potentially saving it. 3 weeks ago, I discovered documents in my grandmother's private study," William began, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "Financial records, correspondence, agreements with foreign governments that paint a picture of corruption going back decades. The royal family has been involved in arms deals, environmental destruction, and political manipulation on a scale that would shock the British people." The room fell silent as the implications of William's words sank in. Thompson, Chen, and Thornberry exchanged glances, each processing the potential catastrophe the prince was describing. If what he was saying was true, the scandal would make previous royal controversies look like minor embarrassments. Chen was the first to speak. "Your Royal Highness, if such documents exist, why not present them through proper channels? Why the need for recording equipment?" Her question went to the heart of the security team's concerns about William's methods. William's laugh was bitter and, without humor. "Proper channels? You mean the same channels that have been covering up these activities for decades? I needed proof of my father's reaction because I suspected he's known about this all along. I needed evidence of whether he would choose to continue the cover-up or finally tell the truth." Thornberry felt a chill run down her spine. In her years of service, she had become aware of certain sensitive aspects of royal finances, but she had always assumed they were legitimate if unconventional arrangements. The possibility that the family's financial dealings crossed legal and ethical lines was something she had never seriously considered. Commander Thompson had been trained to assess threats to the royal family, but he was struggling to categorize the situation he now faced. Was Prince William a threat to the monarchy, or was he trying to save it from an even greater threat? The distinction would determine how the palace responded to the crisis. "Sir," Thompson said, "assuming for a moment that your concerns are justified, surely there are ways to address them that don't involve secretly recording the sovereign. Such actions could be interpreted as treason, regardless of your intentions." The word treason hung in the air like a physical presence. William had not considered that his attempts to force transparency on his family might be viewed as a betrayal so serious that it could cost him his place in the succession. But, as he looked at the faces around the table, he realized that's exactly how his actions might be interpreted by those whose job it was to protect the institution above all else. Chen had been analyzing the data from William's devices while the conversation continued, and she made a discovery that changed the entire dynamic of the situation. "Commander," she said quietly, "I need to speak with you privately." The two stepped into the corridor, leaving William alone with Thornberry. Outside the room, Chen showed Thompson data that made his face go pale. "The devices have been compromised," she whispered. "For the past 3 weeks, someone has been intercepting every transmission, every recording, every piece of data these devices collected. Prince William's investigation hasn't been secret, it's been monitored by unknown parties who now have access to whatever information he's discovered." Thompson realized that the situation had just escalated from an internal family crisis to a potential national security emergency. If foreign intelligence services or hostile media organizations had been monitoring Prince William's investigation, they might already have access to the damaging documents he claimed to have found. The palace's carefully controlled information environment had been breached in the most serious way possible. When they returned to the conference room, Thompson's demeanor had changed completely. "Your Royal Highness," he said, "we have reason to believe that your investigation has been compromised from the beginning. Unknown parties have been monitoring your activities and may already have access to whatever information you've discovered." William's face went white as the implications hit him. "You're saying that everything I've found, everything I was planning to discuss with my father, might already be in the hands of people who want to damage the monarchy?" The irony was devastating. His attempt to save the royal family through transparency might have instead delivered them into the hands of their enemies. Thornberry leaned forward, her years of crisis management experience taking over. "We need to know everything, Your Royal Highness. What documents did you find? Who else have you been in contact with? What information might have been transmitted through these compromised devices?" Over the next hour, William provided a detailed account of his investigation. He described the offshore accounts, the questionable investments, the arms deals, and the foreign government payments he had discovered in his grandmother's papers. He admitted to making copies of the most damaging documents and to having preliminary discussions with investigative journalists about the possibility of publication. Each revelation made the security team more concerned about the scope of the potential damage. If hostile parties had access to William's evidence, they could use it to launch coordinated attacks on the monarchy at the most damaging possible moment. The family would have no time to prepare their response or to implement damage control measures. Chen had been working on her laptop while William spoke, tracing the digital footprints of the compromised surveillance equipment. What she discovered made the situation even worse. "The devices have been transmitting data to multiple locations," she reported. "Based on the routing patterns, it appears the information has been distributed to at least 6 different organizations across 3 continents." Thompson stood up abruptly, the weight of the crisis finally hitting him fully. "Your Royal Highness," he said, "I need to brief His Majesty immediately. This is no longer a family matter, it's a national security emergency." The meeting William had requested with his father was going to happen, but, under circumstances he could never have imagined. As the security team prepared to escalate the crisis to the highest levels of government, William realized that his attempt to control the narrative about his family's secrets had instead created a situation where those secrets might be used as weapons against everything he had hoped to protect. The next few hours would determine whether the monarchy could survive the dual threats of internal corruption and external exploitation. King Charles III had been briefed on many crises during his long wait to ascend to the throne, but nothing had prepared him for the emergency meeting that Commander Thompson requested that morning. As he sat in his private study, the same room where William had planned to confront him hours earlier, the king listened to a report that would fundamentally change how he understood his family's legacy and his own role as sovereign. "Your Majesty," Thompson said, his voice carefully controlled despite the magnitude of what he was reporting, "Prince William has been conducting a covert investigation into royal finances for several weeks. He claims to have discovered evidence of serious wrongdoing, and he came here today intending to secretly record his conversation with you. More critically, his investigation appears to have been compromised by unknown parties who may now have access to whatever information he uncovered." The king's face remained impassive, but Thompson could see the subtle signs of shock and concern in the monarch's posture. Charles had spent his entire life preparing for moments of crisis, but the idea that his own son might have uncovered family secrets serious enough to threaten the monarchy was almost incomprehensible. "What exactly does my son believe he has discovered?" the king asked, his voice steady but tense. Thomson exchanged glances with Deputy Chief of Staff Thornberry, who had accompanied him to provide context about William's claims. Thornberry consulted her notes, though the details were already burned into her memory. Prince William claims to have found evidence in Queen Elizabeth's private papers of offshore accounts, questionable investments, arms deals, and payments from foreign governments. He believes these activities constitute corruption on a scale that could destroy public trust in the monarchy if revealed. The king was quiet for a long moment, his hands folded in his lap as he processed the enormity of what he was hearing. Finally, he spoke in a voice that carried the weight of decades of suppressed knowledge. "Some of those activities were known to me," he admitted. "But they were always presented as necessary for the crown's financial independence and the nation's diplomatic interests. I never questioned whether they might be seen as corruption." Thomson felt a chill run through him as the king's words confirmed that Prince William's investigation had indeed uncovered real secrets. The situation was no longer about a prince with unfounded suspicions, it was about a monarchy that had been involved in activities that could legitimately be seen as corrupt. "Your Majesty," Thomson said carefully, "if these activities are real and if unknown parties now have evidence of them, we may be facing a coordinated attack on the monarchy. We need to understand the full scope of what Prince William discovered and who might have access to that information." The king stood and walked to the window overlooking the castle grounds, his silhouette framed against the autumn morning light. For 74 years, he had been part of an institution that he believed represented the best of British values: duty, service, integrity. Now he was learning that the very foundation of that institution might be built on deception and questionable dealings. "I want to see my son," the king said finally. "Whatever mistakes may have been made, whatever secrets may have been kept, William is still my heir and my child. If he felt compelled to investigate his own family, then we have failed him as surely as we may have failed the nation." Within minutes, William was escorted from the basement conference room to his father's study. The prince looked exhausted and shaken, his usual composed demeanor replaced by the haunted expression of someone who had seen too much. As the door closed behind him, father and son faced each other across a gulf of mutual disappointment and shared fear. "William," the king said, his voice softer than it had been with his security staff, "I understand you've uncovered some difficult truths about our family. I want you to know that whatever methods you used, whatever mistakes you may have made in how you handled this situation, I recognize that you acted out of love for the crown and the people we serve." William felt tears welling in his eyes as he heard his father's words. For weeks, he had imagined this confrontation as a battle between truth and deception, between his generation's values and the compromises of the past. But, sitting across from his father, he saw not a corrupt monarch but a man who had inherited a flawed system and done his best to serve within it. "Father," William said, his voice thick with emotion, "I found documents that show we've been involved in arms sales to dictatorships, investments in companies that destroy the environment, and payments from governments that oppress their people. How do we serve the British people while secretly profiting from activities that contradict everything we claim to believe?" The king closed his eyes as his son laid out the evidence he had discovered. Each revelation was like a physical blow, not because the activities were unknown to Charles, but because he was finally hearing them described in terms of moral responsibility rather than institutional necessity. "You're right," the king said quietly. "We convinced ourselves that these arrangements were necessary for the crown's independence, that they allowed us to serve without being financially dependent on Parliament. But, somewhere along the way, we lost sight of whether the means were justified by the ends." As father and son talked, Commander Thomson and his team were working frantically to assess the security implications of the compromised surveillance equipment. Chen had traced the data transmissions to organizations in Russia, China, and several other countries known for hostile intelligence operations. The information about royal financial dealings was already being analyzed by foreign agencies and, potentially hostile media organizations. The palace's communications director, James Harrison, arrived at the emergency command center with news that made the situation even more dire. "We're getting calls from journalists in multiple countries," he reported. They're asking specific questions about offshore accounts, arms deals, and foreign government payments. Someone is feeding them information that could only have come from Prince William's investigation. Thompson realized that the palace was facing a coordinated information warfare attack. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. William's investigation had been monitored and exploited to create maximum damage to the monarchy at a moment when the family was unprepared to respond. Back in the king's study, Charles and William were coming to terms with the reality that their private family crisis had become a public relations catastrophe. "We have hours, maybe less, before this becomes public," the king told his son. "We need to decide how we're going to respond." William looked at his father with a mixture of admiration and sadness. "We tell the truth," he said simply. "We acknowledge what we've done, we take responsibility for it, and we commit to doing better. It's the only way to maintain any credibility with the British people." The king nodded slowly, recognizing the wisdom in his son's words despite the painful consequences they would entail. "You realize this could end the monarchy as we know it?" he asked. "I'd rather see it end honestly than continue dishonestly," William replied. "Our children deserve better than to inherit an institution built on deception." As the afternoon progressed, the palace prepared for what would become the most significant crisis in modern royal history. The surveillance equipment that William had hoped would force his family to confront their secrets had instead delivered those secrets into the hands of people who would use them as weapons. But, perhaps, in forcing the conversation that the royal family had avoided for decades, the crisis would ultimately strengthen rather than destroy the institution that William loved enough to risk everything to save. The next phase of the crisis would test whether the British monarchy could survive radical transparency, or whether some institutions are too dependent on secrecy to exist in the modern world. The emergency cabinet meeting convened at Downing Street just as the first international news reports began breaking the story that would dominate headlines around the world for months to come. Prime Minister Sarah Henderson sat at the head of the cabinet table, surrounded by ministers who were struggling to comprehend the scope of the crisis facing the British government and the constitutional monarchy that formed the bedrock of their political system. "The situation is unprecedented," Henderson told her assembled ministers. "We have credible evidence that the royal family has been involved in financial activities that may violate both British law and international agreements. At the same time, we believe this information has been deliberately leaked by hostile foreign intelligence services as part of a coordinated attack on British institutions." Foreign Secretary David Whitman had spent the morning fielding calls from ambassadors and foreign ministers around the world, all seeking clarification about reports that were painting the British monarchy as a corrupt institution that had secretly profited from arms deals and environmental destruction. "The international implications are severe," he reported. "Our allies are questioning whether they can continue to treat Britain as a reliable partner if our head of state has been involved in activities that contradict our public positions on human rights and environmental protection." Meanwhile, at Windsor Castle, King Charles and Prince William had made the difficult decision to prepare a complete disclosure of the royal family's questionable financial activities. Working with a team of lawyers, accountants, and communications experts, they spent the day documenting decades of arrangements that had been hidden from public scrutiny. The evidence that William had uncovered painted a picture of systematic deception that went far beyond what even he had initially suspected. The offshore accounts contained hundreds of millions of pounds that had been generated through investments in companies involved in arms manufacturing, environmental destruction, and human rights violations. The royal family had received substantial payments from governments in Saudi Arabia, Russia, and China in exchange for using their diplomatic influence to advance those countries' interests in British foreign policy. Perhaps most damaging was the discovery that Queen Elizabeth herself had personally approved many of these arrangements, viewing them as necessary for maintaining the Crown's financial independence from Parliament. The beloved monarch, who had been seen as the embodiment of British values, had, in private, made decisions that directly contradicted the moral principles she publicly championed. As the palace prepared its response, the story was exploding across international media with a coordination and sophistication that confirmed the worst fears of British intelligence services. The leaked documents weren't being released randomly, they were being strategically deployed to maximum effect by organizations that clearly understood how to weaponize information for geopolitical advantage. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, had spent the day managing the crisis from a personal perspective, trying to shield the royal children from the chaos while supporting her husband through the most difficult period of his life. "The children are asking why there are so many reporters outside," she told William during a brief phone call. "How do we explain to them that their grandfather and great-grandmother may have done things that could end the monarchy they were born to inherit?" The question captured the human tragedy at the heart of the crisis. 3 young children were about to learn that their family legacy was built partly on activities that contradicted everything they had been taught about duty, honor, and service. The personal cost of William's quest for truth was becoming as significant as the institutional consequences. By evening, the palace had prepared a statement that would either save the monarchy through radical transparency or destroy it through devastating admissions of wrongdoing. King Charles and Prince William reviewed the document one final time, knowing that once it was released, there would be no controlling the consequences. "Are we doing the right thing?" the king asked his son as they sat in the study where the crisis had begun that morning. The room that had witnessed centuries of royal decisions was about to witness one of the most momentous choices in the monarchy's history. "I don't know if it's right," William admitted, "but I know it's honest. And I think honesty is the only foundation strong enough to build the future of the crown on." His words carried the weight of a man who had risked everything for his principles and was prepared to face the consequences. The statement they were preparing would acknowledge that the royal family had been involved in questionable financial activities for decades. It would commit to full disclosure of all offshore accounts and investments. It would promise to donate questionable profits to charity and to submit to independent oversight of royal finances going forward. Most significantly, it would establish a new constitutional framework that would make royal financial activities subject to the same transparency requirements as any other public institution. As the statement was finalized, reports were coming in from around the world about the public reaction to the leaked documents. Protests had erupted in several British cities, with demonstrators calling for the abolition of the monarchy. But there were also signs of support for the royal family's decision to confront the crisis honestly rather than attempting to cover it up. Commander Thompson had worked through the day to assess the ongoing security implications of the crisis. The surveillance equipment that had been used to monitor Prince William's investigation had been traced to a sophisticated international operation that appeared to be coordinated by multiple hostile intelligence services. The attack on the British monarchy was part of a broader campaign to undermine Western democratic institutions by exposing their contradictions and failures. "This was never just about royal finances," Thompson reported to the Emergency Security Committee. "The surveillance operation, the coordinated media campaign, the timing of the revelations, it's all designed to create maximum instability in British society at a moment when we're already facing significant political and economic challenges." The realization that Prince William's honest attempt to reform his family had been exploited by foreign enemies added another layer of tragedy to the crisis. His surveillance equipment, intended to force accountability on the royal family, had instead delivered them into the hands of people who wanted to destroy British institutions entirely. As midnight approached, the palace released the most extraordinary statement in royal history. King Charles III and Prince William personally acknowledged the royal family's involvement in questionable financial activities, committed to full transparency going forward, and asked for the British people's forgiveness for the failures of the past. The reaction was immediate and intense. Some praised the royal family for their unprecedented honesty and commitment to reform. Others argued that the admissions were proof that the monarchy was irredeemably corrupt and should be abolished. The constitutional crisis that William had feared when he first discovered the documents in his grandmother's study had become a reality. But, in the days that followed, something unexpected began to happen. The royal family's radical commitment to transparency, combined with concrete steps toward reform, began to generate a grudging respect from many who had been prepared to condemn them. The decision to confront uncomfortable truths rather than hiding from them resonated with a public that had grown tired of institutional deception and cover-ups. 6 months later, the monarchy survived but was fundamentally transformed. The new constitutional arrangements that emerged from the crisis established unprecedented oversight of royal finances, required regular public reporting of royal activities, and created mechanisms for parliamentary review of the Crown's role in British society. Prince William had achieved his goal of forcing transparency on his family, though at a cost he could never have imagined. The institution he had risked everything to save had been fundamentally changed by his actions. Whether the transformation would strengthen or weaken the monarchy remained to be seen, but William had succeeded in ensuring that future generations would inherit a crown built on honesty rather than deception. As he looked back on the day when a royal guard searched him for hidden recording equipment, William realized that the real revelation hadn't been the documents he carried or the surveillance equipment he bore, but the recognition that sometimes the greatest act of love for an institution is the willingness to risk its destruction in service of its principles. The monarchy that emerged from the crisis was smaller, more accountable, and more vulnerable than the one he had inherited, but it was also more honest, and perhaps that was enough.